Okay, so today we're going to go through arrays. What is an array, how you use it, how it relates to Google Sheets. So to start with, we'll get part 1 up. And our goal for the moment, for this lesson, is just to reproduce this information here. But because of the way arrays work, we're going to do it in a special kind of way, and then we'll go back to using actual data that is in the spreadsheet. So to start off, as always, we'll open our script editor, and I'll put these side by side so it's easier to read. Okay, so what we want is a function that takes this information from an array and puts it in these cells. But for the moment, right now, I'll just do an example one to show you how arrays work. So we're not actually going to use this information directly. So we'll call this function sample array, because this isn't actually doing anything, it's just a sample to show you what the concept of what an array is. Okay, and we'll start by saying what we're going to return. So we're going to return a sample array. Alright, so this function doesn't actually have an input. We're not going to have an input for this one. We're just going to do a demonstration of what an array is. Oh, I realize this is spelled wrong. That's embarrassing. Oh well. Okay, so we're going to start off with let array sample array and that's what we're going to return. So let sample array equal, and then we're going to manually write what's in here. So 60, 54, 36, 80, and 40. So the way this array works is you have a square bracket surrounding it, and you have each item in this array separated by a comma. So the reason why we use an array for something is to say these are all the same type of thing. So they're not named. These are all, in this case, these are all sales. So we can actually call this array sales, and then we're going to return sales. And the S on the end implies that this is a set of sales. So the way we do a set in JavaScript is we have the information, comma, next thing, comma, next thing, comma, next thing. So we'll make sure that this works to start with. Save, and then we'll call it here. Oops. Equals sample array. Great, this works, and the formatting is done automatically because these are formatted as currencies. So obviously we can format it differently. It's just a number. We'll keep the format the same because it's the correct format. But the main thing to know here is an array is a set of items. It's separated by a comma, and this can be any information you want. So this could be names. So we're going to have James. And if we save it, you'll see it comes out as a name. You can also put variables in here, so we can say let first item equal string of example, and then we can use this array for our first item, and this also will work. Example. So this points to this variable here. Cool. Okay, so next step, we're going to actually use this data for something. So part 2, what we want to do is we want to work out what the total amount of this sales are. So you can do this pretty easily in Google Sheets. Oh, this should be Google Script and in purple. Oh. Okay, cool. Better. Okay, so in Google Sheets, the way we'd do this is we'd say sum, and we'd put in the range. Easily enough. So we're now going to rewrite this sum formula in Google Script. So we'll call it function sum of sales. I want to give it a really specific name because it's only going to do a very specific job. It's only going to work for this one set, and I'll tell you why in a little bit later. But what this does is it takes sales and it should return the sum of sales. Oops, I don't want to name it the same as the function because that's confusing. So we'll call the function get sum of sales because we're getting it. It's an action, and we're returning sum of sales. So what we want to do to start with is declare sum of sales. It is a number, and we're going to start it off as 0. Now, what I want to show you is, so we're going to call this get sum of sales, and instead of sales, because it doesn't mean anything, we're going to start it off with a equals. We're going to use this set of data as our sales data. Cool. So at the moment it doesn't know it. We'll save it, and then it will, and it's just going to return 0 because that's all we're doing. But to work with our data, we need to understand what format our data is in. So we can, after we do this the first time, we'll know what kind of data format this is in. But to start off with, what we can do is use a function in Google Apps Script called a logger. You can do the same thing in normal JavaScript with console.log, but in Google Apps Script we're using logger.log. So whatever you put in here will go into the log. So for example, if we were to say sum of sales, we can run this function in Google Apps Script editor, and we can view the logs. No logs yet, please wait. Sorry, we want to run get sum of sales. That's the function we want to run. We're going to run it. Now we can look at the log and we can see, no, still can't. Come on. Okay, fine, doesn't matter. I'll show you what we actually came here to see, which is we want to know what is entered in as an input to this function. So we'll save this. We've run it here. We can't do view log because we're not actually running this function in the editor. We're running it in real life in Google Sheets. So the way we can see that is we can look at the executions. So this is the executions of this function. So we go to a different page. We can see all the executions that we've run. What we want to see is the get sum of sales that was done at 4:44. It's 4:45 now, so this should be it. And we can see it's logged this information, and this is an array with each item in an array. So the square bracket says this is a set of items. This says this is also a set of items, but there's only one item in there. So we have an array of length. The length is only 1, and it's 60. And then a second array with the length of 1. And the reason for this is because in Google Sheets, when you select a range, you're actually saying, so the first array, which is this whole thing, is the column. So this is a column, and this is our column. Now this cell is actually in a set of rows, but in this case our row is only 1. So if we had row 2, we'd have 2 items in this array. We only have 1 item in this row, so we have an array of length 1. And then again, 54 is the second item in the array. It's the second row in the column, and this row only contains one item. So square brackets, one item 54, one item 36, one item 80, one item 40. Cool. So now we know what this the format of this data looks like, the structure of this data. We can actually use it. So the way we access the items in the array is with square brackets. So if you say open close square brackets, so this is the array, and then square brackets, if we put a number in here, we get whichever item is that number, that corresponding number. A special thing to note with arrays is we always start with 0. So 0 in this case will give us the first item. So if this is what our script looks like, the first item in the array is this array with 60. So that's number 0. So we're going to try this just to make sure that it works. We'll save it. We'll make sure this script runs again, so then we can see the executions. Get sum of sales, executions, first item in the array is 60. Great. But this is an array, and it's an array of 1. So we want to get the first item in the array, the only item. So what we can do is add another 0. So this says get the first column, get the first item in the row. So first column, first row. Oops. We'll save that. Make sure it runs again. We'll have a look at the executions. It's updated. So we've got 60. Great, that's what we want, because what we want to do is add each of these items to a total figure. So next lesson I'll go through how to do this in a loop, make it a lot easier, but in this case we're going to do it manually so that we can learn how arrays work. So what we want to do is say, so we can access sum of sales, and when it's already, so this is declaring it, so we say let sum of sales exist and be 0. Now what we can do is say let sum of sales equal, and we're going to change the value of it. So we're going to start with the sum of sales, so equals sum of sales plus, and we want this 60. So we can copy this. So sum of sales is equal to the sum of sales plus sales first column, first row. So now we should be able to see this updated once we save it. We can see it updated in our script, 60. Perfect. Now we're going to do this again for each item in the array. So now we want, so now we don't want the first row anymore, we want the second row. And then we want the first column, so we've got 0, and that should take 54. So now what we're hoping for is 114. Save it, make sure it works, 114. And if you're ever not sure if this works properly or not, you can always change it, or let's have a look at the, so this is the, sorry, this is the, it's the first, second, third. There's 2 when we start at 0. So 0, 1, 2 is the third item in the array, and then the first item in that array. So if we save it, look at the execution. Oh, it's already open. So just have a look here. Get sum of sales. Oh, not sample array, but get sum of sales. No logs. Let's make sure we run it again. Refresh. Okay, get sum of sales. It should be at 36. Great. So the third item in the array, and then the first item in that array is 36. So this is the third row, first column. I think I said the opposite before, but this first, this, yeah, you get it. This is the third item in the first array, and then the first item in the second array, which is only one. So to finish this off, we can copy and paste this a few times. Oops, don't need that dot. So we've got 5 items, so we're going to do this 5 times. So the third item in the array, the fourth item in the array, and the fifth item in the array. So now we can save it, and we should get 270. Great. So this is how we access this array. I'm going to get rid of this logger so we don't make the. So if we have a logger, then it adds noise to the log, and we might not be able to find what we're looking for later. So we'll remove it for now. Okay. So save. We want to do part 3. Yep, part 3. Great. So now what we want to do is we have a list of costs. We have a one set tax rate, and what we're doing here is we're saying we want to get the cost with tax. So this first item times the tax to get the amount of tax plus the first item. So we're going to do the same thing in this function, which we'll call get costs with tax. We'll say costs because it implies there's more than one item, so we can expect it to be an array. So get costs with tax, and the things we want to give it is 2 things. One is the list of items that we're going to, the list of costs, and the second one will be the tax. Okay, it doesn't know what it's called because we haven't named it yet, but we're going to take this name that we decided on. Now we're going to declare this function. It has 2 inputs, the first one being the costs, the top costs without tax, so we might call it pre-tax costs, and we'll say costs because it's an array, and the second item is the tax. Great. And what we want to return is a costs with tax, or so we can have a plural at the end of the name and keep it succinct like this. We're going to call it post-tax costs. So return post-tax costs, and we need to declare it. So we'll say let post-tax costs equal an empty array. So we know this is going to be an array, but at the moment it's empty. There's nothing in it. And what we want to do is get our pre-tax costs. We want to times it by tax and then add the pre-tax cost again to get our final result. So again, just to test, what our data is going to look like, we can log it, logger.log pre-tax costs. We're going to label it this time, so we can label it with a string, pre-tax costs, space, close string, plus, and then we want to see what is in here, so pre-tax costs. And we'll do the same for tax. Tax. Great. So we'll save it. Make sure it runs. Reference does not exist. Which reference does not exist? Get costs with tax. We spelled it right. Okay, so reference does not exist probably means we've tried to give it something that doesn't exist. These exist. Maybe we'd reference something that doesn't exist. Post-tax costs, pre-tax costs. Okay, let's try to look at the logs. So if we look at our executions, get costs with tax, well, it has worked, so we'll work out our other problem next. So pre-tax costs has come in as an array. Now, this is a bit funny because the log has stripped away the format of the array because we've said it's a string. So we've said here, like, add it to this existing string. So if you say add 50 to this, because 50 is a number, what JavaScript does is it converts it to a string. So we've had our array converted to a string, which is actually not what we want to do, because we want to know what does this look like as the data. So we'll save it and we'll run it again. I think the problem here with the reference does not exist is we're returning an empty array. So we're returning nothing, and Google Sheets doesn't like that. But we'll get to that in a minute. Get costs with tax. Okay, great. So now we've got our actual array. So again, as we would expect, it's the same as last time because it's the same data. We've got an array with 5 items. So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then each item in the array is an array with 1 item. They are the correct terms as well. For each piece in an array is actually called an item. Okay, so we know how to deal with this because we dealt with it last time. So we'll remove our logs. I just want to test this reference to make sure that it is getting something. So we can say 60 and we'll save it. We'll make sure that it is coming back. Yeah, 60, cool. Okay, so what we need to do here is a little bit different. We need to get our cost of sale, our cost with the tax, and we need to add it to this array. So the way we add something to an array is we push it, and what push means is add it to the end of the array. So we have the array dot push, and whatever we add in here is going to be added to this array and then returned. So for example, we're going to do 50, save it, and we'll get 50. But what we want is the pre-tax costs and the first item, the first item in the first array, and then the first item in the second array. So this should be 60 times the tax plus the pre-tax cost again. If we save this, we should get 71.70. Perfect. But we want all 5. We don't want just 1. And again, next lesson we'll go through loops on how to do this faster and more efficiently. But for now, we're going to do it very manually. We're going to copy and paste each line, and we're going to add 5 of these. And for each of them, we want the next item in the array. So 1, 2, 3, 4. And again here, 1, 2, 3, 4. So now what we're doing is we're taking this empty array, we're adding to it, so we're pushing pre-tax costs, and this will be the first array, the first item in the array, and then the first item in the second array, times by the tax, which we get as this number here, 19%, plus again the pre-tax cost. Then we're doing it again for the second item in the first array, the third item, the fourth item, and the fifth item. Remember, we always start at 0. So if we save this, now we should get, yeah, great, it works first time. It's reassuring. So we've got, we've replicated this, this formula, and instead of having to do one formula for each line, we've actually done one formula in the first line, one function, formula, whatever you want to call it. Technically, because it's in Google Sheets, it's a formula, but whatever. It's also a JavaScript function. So it has 5 items in the array, so it's overridden the next 5 lines. Cool. So we've got part 4 now. This is the last one we're doing. So what this is, let's change it so we can read it. That's weird. Okay, so what we've got is a set of names, and the data here is a message. Thank you for your purchase. So maybe this might be an email message that we're going to send out, for example, and what we want to do is replace this name with the actual customer name. So it should say, "Dear James, thank you for your purchase." The way we do this in Google Sheets, I've already done it. Here, hasn't seemed to work, but reload it. Weird. Maybe our text is wrong. No? Okay, so the way we do it in Google Sheets is a regex replace. The text that we want to edit is this text. The regular expression that we want to match is curly curly name, close curly brackets, and what we want to replace it with is this client name. So we want to replace, so in this text, we want to replace name with the actual data. So client name is James. Dear James, thank you for your purchase. Perfect. Okay, and then we want to do the same in the other cells. Maybe it's just not given enough space. It's very weird. Okay, override it. No. I see what I've done. So we've not actually got the message because I didn't put a $sign. So that's a rookie mistake. We want to lock this cell. So we're going to now drag it. Still not working. But anyway, you know how to do it in Google Sheets. Now we're going to do it in Google Apps Script. Hopefully it'll work better than this example. But what we want to do is the exact same as this. As in, we want to take a set of data. We want to apply something to it, in this case tax. In this new case, we want to have this message. We want to take this data and insert the name. So what we want to do is call this function, we want to call it add name to email. It's not a very good name, but it'll do. It is important what you name this, because when someone else is maintaining this, or even when you're maintaining this, you need to understand what it is this function does. We can call this function anything we want. We can call it poop. It'll still work, but it's useless because we don't know what poop does. But we do know what add name to email does. So it will take a set of names. So we'll call it customer names, and it'll take a message, which we'll call message. And what we want it to do is return emails. Let's call it add name to message. That's more accurate because that's what we're actually doing. So messages with names. Again, the plurals indicate that this is an array. So to declare this array, we're going to do the same as we did above. Let messages with names equal an empty array. We're not going to logger.log this data again because we know that it's a single array, and then each item in the array is an array with a single item, the same as previously. So what we want to do is push our message. So let's keep the spacing consistent. Push, and whatever we put in here is going to be returned. So let's test it. Well, not James, because James is the first one, but test. We'll save it, and then we'll call it here. And we get test. Great. What we actually want though is the message, and then we want to find a thing and replace it. So on Google Sheets, you can find it by the name. On JavaScript, I know what it's called, but for example, you don't get the helpful messages like on here. You can see what this does, what it takes, how to write it, and a sample. The way we get that information on for JavaScript is we can look at MDN. So MDN, I think it's called replace. So string replace, string.replace MDN. So this is the same information as this little helpful bit, except this is in JavaScript. So the way this works is you have a string, you can write .replace, and whatever you put in here, it's going to take two different things. The first one is the regular expression, what it's going to match, and the second thing is what you're going to replace it with. Oh, in German, because I'm in incognito mode. Let's just translate it manually. Okay, so you can read all about it, understand how it works properly. Somewhere here we'll have usually we have an example, but maybe it's because we're on the German site. We don't have an example. Let's just manually change it, see if that magically works. It does, great, cool. Okay, so this is the demonstration of how string.replace works. You have a like what it is you're matching, which you can do as a regex, or you can just do it as a string, which is what we'll do, and then what you're replacing. So in this example, you have P, so this is JavaScript, so you have console.log. In Google Apps Script, which runs JavaScript, you just use logger.log. So you have first item, second item. So now instead of the quick brown dog, the lazy dog, we have over the lazy monkey. Great, so now we know how it works. Let's use it. So message.replace. The thing we want to replace is in curly brackets, and it's name. The thing we want to replace it with is customer names. Now remember, this is the same as here, so we want the first item in the array, and then in that array we want the first item. So we're going to replace name with customer name. Same as we did here, except now we're doing it in JavaScript. Okay, so let's save this and we'll see if it's worked. Error. Cannot read property replace of undefined. So what undefined in this case, it means if you haven't already said, if you haven't defined the variable, it's undefined and you can't access it. But this is a really helpful message because we can find out exactly what's wrong. So cannot read property of replace of undefined. So I've called replace on this and it's saying message is undefined. Why is message undefined? I spelled it wrong. I don't think so. Messages with name is right. Message is right. What's wrong? Ah, because we haven't given it the data. So if this comes in as undefined because it's not given, then it's saying message which you don't know about because there's nothing there, replace something on it. It's not very helpful. The reason why is because we've forgotten to, well, I've forgotten to give it some data. So the first thing we want is customer names. Second thing we want is a message. Dear James, thank you for your purchase. Perfect. So now, again, at the moment we're doing this quite manually. Next lesson we'll do it less manually. Doing it 5 times. Each time we're updating the customer name. So 1, 2, 3, and 4. Remember we always start at 0. So this is the 4th item in the array. Okay, save. And we'll view it. And it's worked. Great. So these are big enough to see, but you can see that it's worked. Cool. Okay. In the description you can see the link to this exercise where you can write each of these functions. And again, if you get stuck, you can come back and watch the video, see what went wrong. And if you work out what I've done wrong here, do let me know, because that's weird. Not really important for now though. Anyway, thanks.